everything. Hello, it's Gammy again. Do you know why my grandkids and great-grandkids call me Gammy? My son-in-law, grown man, started it. He started calling me Gammy, and now it's kind of caught on. I do have 25 great-grandchildren and 14 grands. They don't all call me Gammy, but enough. That's the moniker now. I want to talk to you today about the paper drives and the metal drives of metal products that we had when I was in early elementary school. The war broke out in 41, and it was the same year that I started kindergarten. And so for the next 4 or 5 years during the war, we lived a little differently than we did after the war was over. Our elementary school and all the schools across the country held a paper drive about twice a year during World War II. And the military apparently used the paper. The manufacturers took the paper and reused it for military use. The teachers would give out lengths of twine as much as we wanted, and we went door to door and collected newspapers. Usually one of us had a wagon, and we filled up the wagon with the newspapers, and then we took them back home and put them in bundles and tied them with the twine. And then I suppose we just loaded them back in the wagon and walked back to the school with them. And then there were men that were there to take the bundles from us, and I think it was probably on a weekend, and we left them with the men. So we were filling up wagons all for the war effort, and we were just happy kids, glad to have a community project to join into. In those days, we lived in almost downtown Minneapolis, and there were 2 newspapers a day, the Minneapolis Star and the Minneapolis Tribune. And the cost of a newspaper, and it was a thick newspaper, a lot of pages, the cost was a nickel back in those days. The Sunday edition was 2 or 3 times delivered by boys, always boys, lucky enough to get the job. My husband was one of those. I didn't know him at the time, but he has since told me that he had a valued paper route with the Star and Tribune. He happened to live in right downtown in the shopping area, and his route was right off from Hennepin Avenue and Nicollet Avenue, and it was to pretty rich homes in that area. And he had some tales to tell about that. There were no grocery bags that were available. Everything, when you went to the grocery store or the garments store, if you had the money to shop there, everything was wrapped in a large square of brown paper, like a butcher paper, and then it was tied with a twine, and you saved all of that. You reused it for shelf liner or whatever, and then when you didn't need it anymore, it went in the paper drive. Twine was saved in big balls. It was a competition to see whose big ball of twine was bigger. There was also a house-to-house collection of metal, and we saved any metal. Now, you didn't give away your one pan, your one frying pan, your one mixing bowl that was metal. You didn't give that away because you needed it every day. But those that maybe developed a hole in it, or it was no longer, it was just so rusty you couldn't use it anymore, that went in the house collection of metal. And we emptied every tin can, and mind you, my mother, with her Victory Garden, didn't need many tin cans from the grocery store. She canned every vegetable that you would put in a can, I think. And so we didn't have too many, but we did have a few tin cans, as did our neighbors. Everybody had a Victory Garden back then. But what you would do is empty the tin can, take the lid off both ends, and then with glee stomp on that tin can and make it as flat as possible. And then when the man came down the street to collect the metal, you put that right in with any pans you might have. Sometimes there was a pail, a water pail or whatever, that would spring a hole, and you'd put that in the metal drive too. And the man would come down the street and he'd yell out, "Metal, got any metal?" And when they first started coming to my neighborhood, when I was the youngest, I watched that happen and contributed. It was a man with a horse and a cart, and he was not dressed up in a suit and tie. Pretty scrubby looking from collecting all this dirty, rusty metal, and his horse was pretty droopy looking, but he would slowly come down the street and call that out, and we would run out and put our metal in his cart. We saved aluminum foil. The only foil I remember when I was pretty young was if you were lucky enough to get a stick of gum, the back of the paper that surrounded the stick of gum had very thin aluminum foil, not oil. And we scraped that off and rolled it up in a little ball, and then we added more and more to it until it got to be pretty big, and that went on the metal pile for the scrap drive too. It was a time of patriotism. Everybody did what they could to help our military. So much of life was about the war and the military. There weren't men walking up and down our street or going to the factories. They were in the military, and the women had to take their place. And I saw women going back and forth to work every day and leaving their children with a neighbor or with a grandma or with a gammy. We all did what we could, and it wasn't for pride. It was that's just what you did. Love of country, love of human beings, and precious memories. And I'm fortunate to have those memories. Some people my age, I'm 89 and a half. Some people my age aren't fortunate enough to still have those memories. So I'll do my part in trying to supply it for them. See you next time.